Since the beginning of the war, Israel has hoped to surround the Gaza region with considerable force, an encirclement that carries the devastating potential of a direct and overwhelming assault. Over a period of 2 weeks, Israeli forces, including tanks and troops, surrounded and penetrated the city of Gaza from 3 divergent directions. The city was identified as a nerve center for the Hamas army, however. Instead of immediately entering the intricate labyrinth of streets looking for tunnels, weapons caches, and the annihilation of fighters, Israel adopted a wait-and-see posture. In parallel, precautions were taken to safeguard the soldiers, moving a large number of armored vehicles and a contingent of troops to northern Gaza, effectively establishing a vast military camp, which was visited by my colleague Ronen Bergman. On the coast of Gaza, simultaneously with territorial control, Israel's defensive forces carried out operations in the north of Gaza territory, with the aim of detecting mines, tunnels, and militant elements. This action signaled Israel's preparation for a long and arduous conflict. During this time, Israel also dedicated itself to weakening Hamas's capabilities. Before their troops entered the city of Gaza, Israeli forces continued their attacks, demolishing a large part of the buildings that could be used by Hamas as shelters or ambush points. Alex Plazas of the Atlantic Council commented on this approach. "We call it a shaping operation. We will hit infrastructure, weapons, and military targets from the air, thereby reducing the risks to our ground troops. By postponing the invasion, it has also provided time for the resource blockade to take effect. Simultaneously, Israel has allowed supplies of food, fuel, and water to be reduced, both for combatants and civilians. The availability of food and drinking water is practically non-existent. In Gaza City, forcing people to raid bakeries in search of the last reserves of flour. Experts warn that the blockade will force Hamas to deplete reserves it has stored underground for years. As these events continue, tensions with Syria have reached their peak. Today, U.S. military forces carried out a self-defense attack against a facility in eastern Syria, used by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and its associates. The announcement of the defensive action carried out by 2 F-15 aircraft against a weapons depot was made by Lloyd J. Austin, the Secretary of Defense. This specific action responded to a series of attacks by the Iranian Quds forces against U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria. He emphasized the full preparedness of the United States to safeguard its citizens as well as its facilities, calling to avoid an escalation in the conflict. The expanded context on these attacks reveals the persistent threat to U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. The defense official mentioned that these attacks were carried out by the Revolutionary Guard and militias linked to Iran. The effectiveness of defensive measures against drone attacks was expressed, but caution was also expressed regarding the possibility of escalation or evasion of these defenses. In response, bases were reinforced with more Patriot batteries and defensive counterattack air patrols were intensified. In addition, the intention to continue the missions against ISIS in Iraq and Syria by U.S. personnel was highlighted. These actions are framed in a context of growing tensions as a result of the conflict between Israel and Hamas, which has led to an increase in offensives and defenses to protect forces in the region. Our intention is to make clear that our military actions do not imply a change in our approach to the Israeli conflict, and we do not seek to increase escalation in the region. We remain committed to self-defense and the protection of American personnel, reaffirming our initial position. At a recent press conference, Sabrina Singh, Deputy Press Secretary at the Pentagon, reported that 2 F-15 aircraft attacked a weapons depot the day before. The impact of this attack is being evaluated, but the presence of multiple secondary explosions was confirmed. In the face of potential continued attacks by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and affiliated groups, the U.S. military reserves the right to defend its troops, taking additional measures as deemed necessary. Over the course of nearly a month, 56 U.S. personnel were wounded in attacks in Syria and Iraq. These injuries ranged from traumatic brain injuries to minor injuries. The official highlighted that all were treated and returned to service. In addition to the aforementioned attacks, a simultaneous attack occurred. Tanks of the Israeli Defense Forces attacked temporary structures of the Syrian army in the demilitarized zone of the Golan Heights. This action contradicts the separation agreement between Israel and Syria following the Yom Kippur War in 1974. The Syrian regime is responsible for what happens on its territory and will not tolerate attempts to violate the separation agreement. The escalation of attacks in Gaza has had a negative impact in Syria, as has been observed. At the same time, the attacks in Gaza continue with intensity. Israel has imposed a blockade on the Gaza Strip and carries out massive airstrikes against militants daily. Unfortunately, attacks also claim the lives of innocent civilians. The chaos in the city has led to health problems, with hospitals at capacity and doctors facing significant difficulties. Robert Wood, a senior representative of the United States to the United Nations, delivered a statement to the UN Security Council today. In his speech, he noted the United States' commitment to supplying fuel to hospitals in Gaza, recognizing the urgent need for this resource. He highlighted the tireless efforts to establish mechanisms to ensure the delivery of fuel to these medical centers and to address other pressing needs in the south. However, he also expressed concerns shared by Israel over the storage and diversion of fuel in northern Gaza, considering this situation unacceptable and calling for unanimous condemnation. Although hundreds of aid trucks have entered Gaza since the start of the conflict last year, no fuel has been allowed to be transported, due to Israeli concerns about its possible use by Hamas for rocket manufacturing. The Palestinian Red Crescent warned on social media that the Al-Quds hospital in northern Gaza was at risk of closure due to a shortage of fuel and assistance. Wood stressed to the Security Council the importance of respecting and protecting humanitarian facilities in hospitals and medical centers, as well as those who provide care in them, in strict compliance with international law. In a twist, Israel has recently reduced the intensity of its attacks. However, previous attacks, along with a high number of civilian casualties, have sparked demonstrations in various cities worldwide. Last night, protests in New York led to traffic being blocked. Allied countries, including the United States and the United Kingdom, have called for restraint in these circumstances. The G7 group of nations has demanded that Israel cease hostilities to protect civilians and ensure humanitarian assistance. It is crucial for Israel to maintain the support of its powerful allies, who provide weapons, legitimacy, and deterrence against hostile neighboring countries that pose a threat of regional conflict. Following these pressures, Israel has shown a more moderate tone. The United States recently announced that Israel agreed to stop fighting in certain areas for a few hours a day, allowing people more time and opportunities to move to northern Gaza. Although these pauses seek to reassure Israel's allies, the country persists in its military objective of defeating Hamas. U.S. officials have warned of the risk of a significant increase in deaths if the war drags on, which could encourage more militants to join the Hamas side. The dilemma facing Israel lacks an immediate solution. As the Israeli military moves toward its goal of defeating Hamas, the country's leaders face the challenge of maintaining international support in the midst of this conflict. Attention and monitoring of the situation is essential in this changing scenario.